Sweetheart, use mom's card. She's got about 200 grand saved. My son said it like he was asking for salt at dinner, casual, entitled as if my 40 years of hard work meant nothing. Then he handed my bank card to his wife right in front of me without even looking my way. She smiled, walked out the door, and headed straight to the mall. Hours later, she filled her cart with electronics clothes and imported perfumes. The cashier rang it up, $82,000 inserted. The card looked at the screen and said, "Sorry, but this card is..." And that's when everything I'd buried for years finally cracked open. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If my story touches you, please subscribe to our channel. It helps more people find the strength to stand up for themselves. My name is Elowen Thorne, and this is what happened when I decided to stop being silent. It was 10:30 on a Friday morning, and the smell of rising dough filled the kitchen of my son's house in Ardsley Park. I was rolling pastry for a peach pie when his voice cut through the walls, calm and certain the way men sound when they're giving orders. "Sweetheart, use mom's card. She's got about 200,000 saved." The rolling pin froze in my hands. For a moment, I thought I misheard. But then came Cassidy's voice from the living room, sweet and cautious. "Are you sure she won't get mad?" And Ronan, my only son, the boy I raised alone, laughed softly and said, "She won't say a thing. She lives here for free, eats our food, uses our power. It's the least she can do." I stood there, my hands dusted white, with flour heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. My son wasn't just handing my debit card to his wife. He was handing over 40 years of my life. I could almost see every dollar flash before me, years hunched over a sewing machine in a windowless factory, the smell of bleach from cleaning rich people's floors, the nights I skipped dinner so I could save a few more bills. I sold my small house, once the only home I'd ever owned, just so Ronan could make the down payment on this one, and now I was living here for free. I didn't cry. I'd cried enough in this house. I finished rolling the dough as if nothing had happened. I heard Cassidy's purse jingle her shoes, clicking toward the door. "I'm heading to Habersham Village." Josephine, she called. She always used my name like we were friends, but her voice dripped with ownership. "Need anything? No, dear. Thank you," I said, forcing my tone to stay steady. The front door slammed. When the engine faded, I went to my small room at the end of the hall, pulled out my phone, and dialed the Regions Bank hotline. "This is Elowen Thorne," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Please block my card immediately. I'll pick up a new one in person." The operator confirmed at 11:25 a.m. The moment she said, "Your card has been frozen," I felt my lungs finally release. Meanwhile, at the mall, Cassidy filled her cart like a queen on a spree television designer. Bags, imported perfumes, new appliances. The cashier scanned everything, the total flashing $82. She swiped my card, paused, frowned at the screen, and said, "Sorry, but this card is blocked." The silence that followed must have burned hotter than the summer heat. I imagined her face tightening, imagined the eyes of strangers turning to look. For once, I didn't feel guilty. Back at home, I looked at my hands. 68 years old skin, thin as paper, but still strong enough to knead dough and clean up after a family that treated me like a guest who overstayed her welcome. I told myself I'd had enough. The flour on the counter looked like the dust of time, everything I'd worked for scattered and stepped on. I glanced toward Ronan's study. The door was cracked open. Inside, a file lay on his desk, escrow, Ardsley Park. It meant one thing: money trouble. His phone buzzed just then, a message flashing from Mason, Cassidy's brother. I didn't know it yet, but that name would haunt the rest of the story. That afternoon, when I heard Ronan's footsteps returning from work, I had already made my decision. I whispered to myself, no more tears, no more silence, And for the first time in 20 years, I said it out loud, I will not let anyone touch the last dollar of my 40 years again. By noon, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The air in the living room was tight and sharp the way it gets before a thunderstorm. Cassidy sat sprawled across the sofa, her territory arms crossed, face flushed with rage. My chair near the window felt smaller than ever. Her phone rang again and again, flashing declined. $82,000. Ronan stormed in, phone in hand, eyes blazing. Mom, why would you do that? Cassidy was humiliated. She was standing there with a full cart, people staring. That's my money, Ronan, I interrupted. I never gave permission for anyone to spend it. He blinked, taken aback by my tone. I rarely raised my voice to him. You live here rent-free, he shot back. You could help with something once in a while. My voice trembled, but I didn't back down. Every month I give you my entire pension. I cook clean, wash iron. I helped you buy this house. And you still call that living here for free? Cassidy jumped in, her tone sharp. Families share, Mrs. Thorne. That's what family means. I turned toward her. I'm Ronan's mother, not your wallet. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Ronan rubbed his forehead. Mom, you're almost 70. What do you need $200,000 for? We're struggling. The mortgage bills. His voice softened, almost pleading. You don't have to worry about independence now. We'll take care of you. I felt the sting of that word, take care. I didn't want to be taken care of. I wanted to live with dignity. I've spent my whole life being careful, Ronan. All I wanted was a small apartment of my own, a door that locks, a place where no one tells me I'm a burden. Cassidy rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. Mason said we could use the money just for a few days, buy the things now, return them later, rotate the funds. It's no big deal. Her words slipped out fast, careless. Mason again. That name flickered in my mind like a warning light. I looked toward Ronan's laptop still open on the dining table. A new email blinked on-screen, subject line, past due, urgent. My heart sank. They were drowning in debt. Suddenly I saw the whole picture, the pressure to look successful, the desperate attempts to keep up appearances, and the quiet resentment toward the woman who had savings while they were sinking. I wanted to feel compassion, and I did. He was my son, still that small boy who used to cry when I came home, late from work. But love doesn't mean surrender. I took a deep breath. Ronan, I understand you're under pressure, but that doesn't give you the right to take what isn't yours. He opened his mouth to argue, but Cassidy slammed her phone on the table. This is insane. Mason said it'd be fine. Then she stopped realizing what she'd revealed. I stared at her, my voice quiet but cutting. So Mason planned this, not you. Ronan's jaw clenched. Mom, don't twist things. But I'd already seen enough. I'm leaving, I said finally. I can't live in a house where I'm seen as a source of cash instead of family. Ronan's tone softened instantly. Please, Mom, don't make this bigger than it is. Just wait until next week, we'll figure it out. I didn't answer. I walked down the hall past the framed photos, his graduation, his wedding, all the moments I'd believed meant something. In my room, I pulled open the drawer where I kept my documents, slipped my ID, savings book, and check records into my handbag. Then I sat on the bed for a long minute, listening to their muffled voices, arguing in the living room. At 3:12 p.m., I sent a single text to my oldest friend, Iris. I need a place to stay tonight. The moment I pressed send, I felt something break free inside me. Not sadness, not even anger, just a deep, steady certainty, the kind that comes when you finally remember who you are. Rain began just after sunset, the kind that barely made a sound but soaked everything in minutes. The streetlights along Ardsley Park glowed through the drizzle, soft and golden against the wet pavement. Inside the house, the clock on the wall ticked, slow and deliberate, like it was counting the seconds until I left. My bags sat by the door, 2 small suitcases that held everything I owned, now clothes, papers, a few photographs, and the remains of my savings. I left my house key on the dining table beside a folded letter written in my neat, shaky hand. "Thank you for 20 years," it said. "I have to choose peace. When I'm settled, I'll send you my address." I stood there for one last moment, listening to the sound of rain against the windows, to the silence of a house that had once been full of laughter. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked here, the laundry folded the long nights awake, worrying about bills that weren't even mine, and then headlights flashed through the front window. Iris's old Buick stopped by the gate wipers, squeaking in rhythm with the rain. She didn't honk. She just waited like she'd known I needed that quiet. As I stepped outside, Mr. Clarkson, my elderly neighbor, opened his door across the street. He looked at me under his porch, light nodded slowly, and said, "About time you lived for yourself, Allowin." His words hit deep. I smiled faintly, nodded back, and climbed into Iris's car. The door closed with a soft thud, and the sound felt like a string snapping inside me, thin, invisible, and final. We drove without talking. The city blurred past the familiar streets, fading behind us as the rain turned heavier. When we reached River Street, the storm had softened again. Iris's apartment was small but warm, perched above a coffee shop that smelled like cinnamon and rain. She handed me a towel, poured 2 cups of chamomile tea, and said, "You'll start fresh here, one night at a time." Her place overlooked the Savannah River. The curtains were thin, the lights dim, the couch old but soft. She'd already laid out a spare blanket for me. New sheets, she said proudly. Smell like lavender. That night, I slept harder than I had in years. But just before I drifted off, my phone buzzed. Ronan. The messages came one after another. "Mom, where are you? Are you crazy?" Cassidy's crying her eyes out. "You're abandoning your family. If you don't come back tonight, I'm calling the police." The words blurred together, angry and desperate. I held the phone for a long time, feeling both guilt and exhaustion. Iris walked in quietly, took one look at the screen, and said, "Don't answer tonight. Tomorrow we look for your new home." I turned the phone face down. The rain outside had stopped, leaving only the sound of the river brushing against the docks. I thought that would be the end of the night. But as I unpacked a single envelope slipped out of my suitcase, one I didn't remember packing. My name wasn't written on it. Inside was a document stamped Escrow Addendum, Ardsley Park. It looked official, too clean to be random. Someone had slipped it into my belongings. My first thought was Ronan, or maybe Cassidy, or Mason. Whoever it was, I suddenly understood that walking out of that house didn't mean I'd escaped it. I sat on the couch until dawn, holding the paper under the lamplight, my pulse beating in my ears. There was only one thing I could do. Tomorrow morning, I'd go to the bank in person and ask what was happening under my name. Morning came gray and heavy. The smell of coffee filled Iris's apartment as she hummed some old soul tune under her breath. She drove me downtown to the Regions Bank branch on Broughton Street. I'd barely slept, but my mind was sharp. The teller, a young woman named Imani, greeted me with that polite, trained smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne. How can I help you today?" I explained everything my card, the unauthorized, used the suspicious document I'd found. Her expression changed as she typed on her computer. "Mrs. Thorne," she said softly, "there was an attempt to access your account information remotely 2 days ago. It was denied after the system flagged the device as unfamiliar. She printed a form for me to sign authorizing a fraud review. Then she added, 'For security, we'll issue a new card. Do you want it mailed?' 'No,' I said quickly. 'I'll pick it up myself.'" After we left the bank, Iris said, "Well, that's handled. Now let's find you a place that feels like yours." We spent the rest of the day driving around Savannah. The first apartment was in an old building near Bull Street, dark, damp, and noisy with traffic. The second had a broken elevator and smelled faintly of mold. The third was too cramped. The fourth was near the railroad tracks, where the walls rattled every time a train passed. Each one felt wrong. Too small, too loud, too lonely. By the time we reached the fifth, the sun was low, spilling gold over Wilmington Island. The real estate agent opened the door, and a warm smell of pine filled the air. The floors gleamed. The kitchen opened into a small living room with light streaming through big windows that looked out on a park. I stepped inside and felt something I hadn't felt in years, quiet that wasn't heavy, just peaceful. "This is it," I said without hesitation. "This is home." The price was $98,000. I placed a $5,000 deposit on the spot and signed the preliminary agreement. Iris snapped a photo of me standing by the window and sent it to me later with a caption, "The beginning of your next chapter." For the first time in months, I smiled without forcing it. That night, I called a law office recommended by a friend of Iris's to help me review the property papers. A man named Jude Lansing returned the call within an hour. His voice was calm, efficient. I explained briefly about the escrow document that had shown up in my luggage. There was a pause on the line before he said, "You mentioned the name Mason Vale, right? I've heard that name before. He was tied to a credit rotation case we investigated last year. Might be worth keeping an eye on." Something cold moved through me. This wasn't just about family greed anymore. This was something bigger people who use names, accounts, and trust as tools to get what they wanted. It was late when I finally sat down by the window watching the park lights shimmer in the distance. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ronan. "Mom, come home. We need to talk. I know you took the escrow papers from my office. You could get in trouble for that." I stared at the screen, confused and angry. I hadn't taken anything. Someone had planted it. Why would my own son accuse me? I could almost hear Cassidy's voice behind those words. Iris leaned over my shoulder, read the message, and said, "Don't respond. Let the lawyer handle it. We'll meet Jude tomorrow." I nodded, turned off my phone, and stepped onto the balcony. The iron railing was cool under my fingers, the air clean after the rain. Below me, kids laughed in the park. I felt the faint hum of the city alive, careless, and free. I whispered to myself, "I'll buy this place in my name, live by my own rhythm, and protect it with the law if I have to." That night, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of losing myself again, and I swore I never would. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet pavement still drifted through the cracked window. A week had passed since I placed the deposit on my apartment, and the air in Iris's living room felt calm for the first time in months. The lampshade glowed amber against the walls, and I was bent over the small dining table, sorting through documents for my meeting with Jude Lansing in the morning. The sound of the Savannah River murmured in the distance, a steady hum that almost made me forget the noise of my old life. Then came a sharp knock on the door. 3 quick raps, too familiar. Iris froze mid-step. "You expecting someone?" she asked. I shook my head. She peered through the peephole, sighed, and whispered, "It's your son." Ronan stood there in the hallway, damp hair clinging to his forehead, his shirt-wrinkled eyes hollow, like he hadn't slept. "Mom, I just want to talk," he said quietly. For a long moment, I said nothing. Iris stepped aside reluctantly, and I nodded for her to stay in the next room, but within earshot. He sat down at the table, fidgeting with the strap of his worn leather bag. "Cassidy's sorry," he began. "She just went too far that day. We both did." I shouldn't have said what I said. I just want things to go back to how they were. I folded my hands on the table. "Nothing goes back, Ronan. Not once you break trust. It doesn't heal like that." He exhaled, rubbed his eyes, and nodded slowly. "You're right. I didn't know what else to do." Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. When he dropped it onto the table, a few papers slipped out, one of them sliding toward me. I caught a glimpse of the title Joint Ownership Application. My name was listed beside his next to the address of Ardsley Park. My stomach turned cold. "What is this?" I asked. He froze. "It's just paperwork," he said quickly. "The bank said if you're listed as co-owner, they can refinance the loan. It'll fix everything. Cassidy and I were just behind on payments, Mom. I thought you could fix your mess by dragging my name into it. My voice rose before I could stop it. Iris came out of the hallway, her arms crossed, watching him closely. Mom, please. The house is about to go under. Cassidy's business failed, but it's not her fault. Mason said it would work, and Mason, I repeated slowly, he's still involved. Ronan hesitated, then nodded. He helped set up a loan, just temporary. But now the bank wants proof you're a financial contributor. That's why I needed your signature. I stared at him. Do you even hear yourself? You want me to risk everything I've worked for because your wife's brother played banker. He looked at me with those same pleading eyes he had when he was 10 when he broke the neighbor's window and begged me not to tell. If you don't help Mom, I'll lose the house. I'll lose everything. He softened his voice, reaching across the table like I was the child now. I know about your apartment, the one you're trying to buy. If you sold it, we could save everything. You wouldn't have to live with Iris. You'd live with us again. I stiffened. How do you know about the apartment? He swallowed. You left the contract on the table. I took a photo. I was worried you'd make a mistake. I felt something inside me snap. You didn't worry, Ronan. You spied. You've crossed every line there is. He looked small-cornered like a man who had gambled everything and realized too late he'd lost. I just need time, Mom. I can't do this without you. I rose from my chair. You already are without me. And if you stay another minute, you'll make it worse. He stared at me desperate, waiting for me to give in like I always had, but I didn't move. Iris stepped forward, voice firm as steel. You have 10 minutes before I call the police. He blinked, looked between us, then gathered his papers. At the door, he said, You're making a mistake, Mom. I didn't answer. The door shut behind him, and the apartment was silent again except for the river's low hum. My hands trembled as I sat back down. Minutes later, my phone buzzed a new email from Jude. A third party has requested verification for a property transaction under your name, it read. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. They weren't just trying to take my money, they were trying to make it legal. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the city still smelled like wet leaves and car exhaust. I took the bus downtown to Jude Lansing's office. It was a quiet building on Oglethorpe Avenue, paneled in dark wood, filled with the faint scent of paper and coffee. Jude greeted me with a calm handshake. His suit was crisp, his tone steady, but his eyes carried that sharpness of someone who'd seen too many lies on official letterheads. I placed the envelope marked escrow addendum on his desk and told him everything about Ronan's visit the night before. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. Then he opened the folder and frowned. This file was downloaded from your personal email 5 days ago, he said. See this? He pointed to a line of text near the bottom. Accessed from external IP. Whoever did this used your login credentials. I felt my chest tighten. Can you trace it? He nodded. Partially. But first, you should file a fraud report at your bank. I'll coordinate with their legal department. So I went back to Regions Bank and asked for Imani again. She recognized me instantly. Mrs. Thorne, did you get our call? We flagged another attempt to view your financial statements last week. She turned her monitor toward me. The IP was registered under the name Mason Vale. The world tilted a little. Cassidy's brother, Imani, nodded slowly. He must have had access to documents with your information. You should report this to law enforcement immediately. By the time I returned to Jude's office, my hands were shaking. He'd already been digging. I contacted a colleague, he said. Mason Vale's name has surfaced before he was investigated last year for money laundering through elder accounts. Nothing was proven, but it's the same pattern. I felt cold all over. So my family was being used. Jude hesitated. It looks that way. But Cassidy likely knew. She's tied to multiple transactions from your address. They may have been working together. I sat back staring at the papers on his desk. My life had turned into a trail of signatures and digital footprints, each one pulling me deeper into something I hadn't agreed to. When I got back to Iris's that afternoon, I tried to breathe to find comfort in the small things, the smell of fresh coffee, the hum of her radio. But the peace didn't last. My phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from Cassidy. "If you don't stop this, I'll tell everyone what you did with that house money years ago." For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind went straight back to 1998, when I sold the small condo I'd shared with my late husband. I'd taken $50,000 from the sale to help Ronan with his down payment. I hadn't reported all of it properly. It wasn't a crime, not really, but it could look bad. Cassidy knew enough to twist it. Iris found me staring at the message, pale. "What's wrong?" I told her. She listened, then said quietly, "That's what they want, Elowen. They want you scared enough to stay quiet. Don't give them that." I sat there for a long time, weighing everything. Fear, guilt, pride, the kind of love that can destroy you if you let it. Finally, I reached for a pen. "Jude's right," I said. "This isn't just about them anymore. It's about my name." That evening, I signed a power of attorney authorizing Jude to continue with the property purchase and to contact the Financial Crimes Division on my behalf. Then I drafted a report detailing every unauthorized action, every document, every message. When I finished, I felt lighter, though the weight hadn't left. The sun was setting, painting the river pink and orange outside the window. I watched the light fade and whispered to myself, "They took enough from me already. Now I fight." In that moment, I understood this was no longer about money. It was about dignity, and I wasn't going to lose that again. The courtroom was small and bright wood, polished to a shine that made everything feel exposed. I sat beside Jude Lansing while a representative from Regions adjusted his tie, and across the aisle, Ronan kept his eyes on the floor. Cassidy wore sorrow like perfume. Mason folded his arms and smirked until the bailiff told him not to. Jude stood first, voice steady, and laid the tracks of what had happened, unauthorized logins traced to an IP registered to Mason Vale, a fabricated escrow addendum, prepared to suggest I had agreed to co-own my son's house, and a sequence of emails requesting my financial records. When the judge asked for comment, Mason leaned toward the microphone and said she gave permission verbally. Family stuff. We were just helping. Cassidy nodded along, soft and devoted. The judge turned to Ronan. "Did your mother authorize any of this?" The room went still. Ronan hesitated, picked at an invisible thread on his sleeve. "My mother may have agreed. She doesn't understand all the paperwork." He didn't look at me. I felt something final break inside, small, quiet, irreversible. Jude asked to submit an audio file. The judge allowed it. Imani Rhodes from Regions had recorded my call the day I froze my card for compliance purposes. The playback filled the room with my voice calm, plain, unmistakable. "No one is authorized to access my account, no one including my son." The click of the line hanging up was louder than any gavel. Jude wasn't finished. He placed a drive on the clerk's tray and walked the court through a ledger 3 days after the blocked card at the mall, $30,000 moved from an account linked to Mason into one bearing Cassidy's name. The Region's rep confirmed the timestamps. Cassidy's face drained of color. Ronan looked at her like he'd never seen her before. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Vale, you'll be remanded pending further investigation." Cassidy stood too fast, chair scraping. "Ronan, tell your mother I did it for you," she cried as deputies approached. Ronan sank into the bench, eyes glossy hands, useless in his lap. I felt the ache of him, and still I stayed where I was. "You have a road back," I whispered when he finally looked at me, but I don't. Rulings came crisp and orderly. The court affirmed my Wilmington Island purchase as lawful and independent. Mason was held for investigation. Cassidy was warned she faced civil liability and potential charges. Outside, rain needled the courthouse steps. Ronan started toward me, lips forming my name. I shook my head and kept walking, letting the rain have my face. I thought I had lost everything. Maybe I had just found the part of me I needed most, the part that stands upright when the room tilts. 2 weeks later, autumn breathed at the edges of Savannah. In Jude's office, the pen felt heavier than it looked, and each letter of my name sounded like a soft door closing on the past. "Congratulations," Jude said, placing a small bright bundle in my palm. The keys were cool, honest metal. I held them like a heartbeat I could finally trust. In the hallway, Ronan waited, thinner eyes rimmed with red. "Mom," he said, "I spoke to the detectives. I told the truth. Mason will be prosecuted. I'm sorry I didn't stand with you." His voice shook. I swallowed. "Good," I said. "You're learning to be honest." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and set his wedding ring on the table. Cassidy left. I lost almost everything. "When you spoke at court, I realized I never saved you. You always saved me." I pushed the ring back. "Keep it," I said. "Let it remind you where the line is." By afternoon, I was at the apartment on Wilmington Island, lights spilling over bare floors like a blessing. I hung curtains, wiped counters, brewed coffee in a thrifted kettle. Iris waved from the street with a paper bag of nails and a tiny hammer, then shouted something I couldn't hear and laughed like we were 20 again. I stood by the window and let the quiet settle. This was the sound I'd been saving for. An email pinged from Jude. The investigators had linked Mason to multiple schemes targeting older relatives. There would be restitution. I would receive $15,000 from a broader action. Not much, I said aloud, smiling, but enough for a little garden. At dusk, I slid the new key into my lock. The tumblers turned smooth like the inside of a true word. The door opened with the gentlest sound, almost a breath. I stepped in and left it closed behind me, not against anyone, but for me. A year later, the windows wore summer, and the apartment smelled of basil and clean laundry. My life had rhythms now. Morning watering on the balcony, afternoons teaching kids the patience of yarn and pattern in the community room. Evenings with tea at the window, the park below playing its soft chorus. Letters came from Ronan once a month, short, careful, without excuses. He wrote about a modest job in Midtown, a rented one-bedroom therapy on Wednesdays. I kept each envelope in a box under the bed, not as proof, but as progress. One Sunday, he arrived unannounced, holding a handful of wildflowers and a single sheet of paper. "New policy," he said, smiling in a way I'd almost forgotten. "You're the sole beneficiary." We sat at the small table by the window. I asked, "Do you think I've forgotten?" He shook his head. "No, and you don't have to. You just have to live." In the quiet that followed, I heard how much the boy in him had grown. I poured coffee. We didn't rush. After he left, another knock came, softer, uncertain. Cassidy stood there, makeup gone, clothes plain, face tired. I lost the suits. I lost the shop. I came to say, "I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long time. "No one is poor for apologizing," I said, "but you can't come back." I walked her to the top of the stairs and closed the door gently. No anger, only closure. Evening drew a gold line across the floor. My students' laughter drifted up from the courtyard where they were knotting bracelets and telling secrets the way children do. I leaned on the rail and counted the ways I was not alone. Iris bringing extra tomatoes from her garden, Jude stopping by with a bag of nails and 2 paintbrushes, Mrs. Ortiz from downstairs leaving a slice of pound cake on my mat. It came to me clear as water, family is the place your shoulders drop. Blood helps, safety decides. Just before dark, a letter arrived from the court. Mason had been sentenced to 5 years. I set the envelope on the mantel and filled the kettle. No triumph, no bitterness, only the quiet click of something finishing. Later, I wrote, "People ask if I regret anything. I do. But if I hadn't lost what I thought I needed, I would never have found what I could not live without." I turned off the lamp. Moonlight reached across the room and found the keys hanging by the fireplace. They caught the light and held it as if to say, "This is yours," and it always will be.